Greetings and thank you for listening to this episode of Stormwater Talk. My name is Jonathan Hill, and I'm responsible for communications and outreach for the East Baton Rouge Parish Stormwater Master Plan. This is a production of the East Baton Rouge Parish Stormwater Master Plan, Franklin Associates, and I'm joined here with my producer today, Christina Lacroix. The East Baton Rouge Parish Stormwater Master Plan and 20-year capital improvement plan seeks to identify flood-related risk, vulnerabilities, and recommend capital improvements to mitigate or reverse those risks. And to find out more about the Stormwater Master Plan, you can visit stormwater.brla.gov. You can also follow on social media at StormwaterEBR. On this episode of Stormwater Talk, we have Al Scallan with Henry Insurance Service. Al has over 30 years of experience as a commercial and personal insurance agent who handles all types of property insurance, from simple homeowners to complex multi-year construction projects. Al will be on to talk about the FEMA insurance rating and give us some information on what we need to protect ourselves from flood risk as it relates to flood insurance. So Al, thank you for joining us for this episode of Stormwater Talk. We're grateful to have you as a guest on this episode, and we're grateful that you're here to talk about all things as relates to insurance, and a little bit more specifically, flood insurance. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And so as a commercial and both personal insurance agent, we know you have a wealth of information and knowledge as it relates to claims and things of that nature. But today, I want to talk more so about the impact of flooding on insurance. We know here in South Louisiana, we get pop-up showers, and sometimes those showers become very persistent, but also dealing with hurricanes and properties being flooded. Oftentimes people have questions about whether I should have flood insurance, how much flood insurance I should have, when do I need to file a claim, and just the process of that. So let's just talk in general, starting off about what is a flood as defined by the insurance world.
Okay. And if I could, I'd like to just say that in preparation for this talk, I've talked to people that have flooded in the past. And the most interesting thing is, almost to a person, they all have said it was the most significant event in their lives. And if you sit back and think about that for a second, you think of deaths, marriages, all the things that happen, and these flood events after the fact, they go on maybe for years. And so that really leads into why flood insurance is necessary. So back to your original question is, what is a flood? And what we're going to do is I'm going to use the National Flood Insurance Program's definition, and that is it's a general and temporary condition of a partial or complete inundation of 2 or more acres of normally dry land, or of at least 2 or more properties, at least one of which is yours. And that is a very technical definition, but the reason is the National Flood Insurance Program wants to define specifically what is a flood.
Well, that's good to know. We always want to make sure we can define the terms clearly, based off those who will be interpreting the event that is taking place. And so when we think about what you just stated as it specifically relates to property, most individuals will have some type of insurance on the property that they currently own, rent, or lease. And so does their current property insurance cover being flooded, right? If they were at risk for being flooded or had to deal with the flood, would their current insurance cover it?
That's a great question, Jonathan. The matter of fact, no. And that's a common misinterpretation of regular, generally you're talking about homeowners policy, or in the case of a commercial property, business insurance, that specifically excludes flood. In particular, Katrina, there was a lot of litigation and conversation about whether or not all of these homeowners, whether those homeowners covered flood, many lawsuits and so on. But the bottom line, the answer is no, it does not.
And so for our listeners out there, just to be clear, and I want to reiterate it, your standard homeowners insurance homeowners insurance does not cover a flood should it happen to you.
Correct. Now, I want to just make a point. as in the definition of the National Flood Insurance Program. One minor exception is that sewer backup can be covered by a homeowner's, but interestingly, it only refers to your property. So that's not going to be in the definition of NFIP flood because that says, as we talked about earlier, 2 or more properties. So that is a specific thing that can be covered in a homeowner's or general property form.
And so when you think about what you've shared with us, then who really needs flood insurance? Is it something that, as a property owner or renter, that I should consider getting?
Absolutely, Jonathan. The thing is, for most people, if they were to do a balance sheet in a business as well, their most significant asset is their home. So anyone that has any type of financial interest in a home or a building, and something often left out is the contents insurance. So renters, they could literally have $100,000 or more in value in their contents, and that is something that's often overlooked by renters. So they also have a need for flood insurance.
And so we know floods can happen anywhere, and we've seen that living here in Baton Rouge. And so when you think about the amount of damage that a flood can do, if you had to kind of quantify, if I had, 1 inch of water in my house, about how much damage could that equate to?
Well, an inch is enough, but we see there's a statistic that National Flood Insurance puts out. They say an inch of water can cause $25,000 worth of damages or more. The custom home with really expensive wood floors, antique pine floors, and things like that, you're talking well in excess of that $25,000.
Wow, just from simply 1 inch of water.
1 inch of water.
And so based off what you shared with us, who's eligible for flood insurance?
So flood insurance, and I want to make this point, is that you can buy flood insurance through both the National Flood Insurance Program and private insurers. And according to NFIP, they have 23,000 participating National Flood Insurance Program communities for which rates have been developed. And really, it covers just about any area. There are very few exceptions to that. So it's widely available.
And so knowing that there's some eligibility across individuals who live in the NFIP communities, when I get this flood insurance, should I be eligible? What is covered? What exactly is covered within my property?
Okay, so with the building, it's insured building, its foundation, electrical system, central air conditioning, furnaces, water heaters, refrigerators, cooking stoves, built-in appliances such as dishwashers and even perhaps ovens, permanently installed carpeting over unfinished floors, paneling, wallboard, bookcases, cabinets, window blinds, debris removal, to name a few things.
So there's a great deal of things that are covered by ensuring that I have flood insurance.
Correct.
That's good to know that we're not just getting insurance and we don't know what it will cover should we have to deal with an unfortunate event like a flood.
I did want to add, Jonathan, that also with contents insurance, it covers your personal belongings, clothing, furniture, electronic equipment, curtains, portable air conditioners, portable microwaves, ovens, and so on. Movable things such as washers, dryers, freezers, and typically the bank, which is the mechanism by which forces people to buy flood insurance, the bank will not make you buy contents coverage. Thus, many people don't think about that. The bank's interest is covered by covering the home, but your interest is in the contents. So wanted to point that out.
So we've talked a great deal about what is covered under the flood insurance. But there's also some things I'm sure that are not covered. And just in our conversation prior to this, it was interesting to learn some of the things that are not covered. So I want you to kind of discuss what's not covered, and then we'll see if we can highlight a few of those, which I think I found interesting to our listening audience.
Yeah, so one of the things that's not covered by flood insurance, if you were to have some dampness or mold because you have wet conditions in your home that are not addressed, flood insurance is not going to address that. But as far as contents go, it's not going to cover cars, vehicles, property and belongings outside of a building, trees, plants, shrubs, wells, septic tanks, walks, decks, patios, fences, seawalls, hot tubs, and swimming pools. So you can see that there's a lot of value in those things, but these things are not eligible to be covered under the flood insurance program.
So let me just ask you a question about that. So when you talk about property outside of the building, and you mentioned cars specifically.
Yes.
And so if my vehicle was parked in the driveway and the water got to my car before it got to the house, flood insurance will not cover that. That would probably be under my automotive insurance potentially?
That's correct. It would be under the comprehensive coverage of your auto.
And then you mentioned moisture and mildew or mold. If that came about as it relates to the flood, it still would not be covered under flood insurance.
Typically, it will be covered under flood insurance because there's a certain amount of that that's going to occur because of a flood. There is an exception. You can't just let the house sit after a flood. You need to have some due diligence involved in getting the wet things out. So that's more in the claims process than in anything else.
Okay. Any more things we need to be aware of that are not covered by flood insurance?
Yes. One of the things is, and this is more relates to a business, is that whereas on a business property insurance policy will pay for loss of business income, that is something that is not covered in a flood. So in Hurricane Katrina, for example, we have businesses closed for months and even years, whereas their general property insurance would have covered loss of earnings due to a fire, for example. Flood insurance does not do that. We actually have to supplement that with a policy called the difference in conditions.
So you've given us a great deal of information about the risk we have, who's eligible, what's covered, what's not covered. And so as one who would be thinking about purchasing flood insurance to protect my investment in property, where can I find it? How do I buy flood insurance?
Okay, your normal insurance agent, whoever writes your homeowners or your business or anything like that. So just about any agent that sells either personal or commercial property insurance is going to sell flood insurance. I would say it's almost universal.
So it's something that you would recommend that I check with my current insurance agent about to see what's available and consider purchasing it?
Absolutely.
And so I understand there is a massive change underway in flood insurance. What is that about?
So really in addressing a lot of things, FEMA came out with something called Flood 2.0, and their subtitle for it is called Flood 2.0 Equity in Action. And essentially it's a shifting of the rating structure from a zone or area rating system to more of an individual location rating. And FEMA states that there are three objectives to that. Number one is responsibility, where FEMA has a statutory mandate to set actuarially sound rates and clearly communicate risk. Equity, that individuals will no longer pay more than their fair share of flood insurance premiums based on the value of the homes. And according to FEMA, 2/3 of policyholders with older homes, what they call pre-flood insurance, will see a premium decrease. And the last thing is sustainability. This rating, a lot of people, flood insurance continually has to be re-energized and refunded federally. So one of the objectives is that this 2.0 puts NFIP on a path to become more financially sound.
And so the changes you mentioned, what is the impact of this change?
So previously, flood policies were used FEMA source flood data, rating variables such as flood maps, base flood elevation, foundation type, structural elevation, whether or not there was whether you're in a 1% chance of flooding historical area or not, and then fees and surcharges. Now, in addition to the FEMA source data, they're using commercially available flood data, and the metrics have gotten really good, actually due to many of the floods that have happened. Now, with building material increases, they're using a cost to rebuild. With the rating variables, distances to coast, oceans, rivers, the river class, flood type, ground elevation, first floor height, construction foundation type, so a broader percentage range of flood frequency. So they're using more factors in the rating process.
So what is the impact on the rates?
So, and this is something that we've observed in our rating process. The bottom line is this: if a property was low before and it's still low, it's still going to have high flood insurance. And if it's in a good area, it's going to have a good rate. But the ultimate goal is to make the premium commensurate with the flood risk. So, but what we're seeing is, and these are national averages, mind you, and there are some metrics in Louisiana, but they say that 66% of the flood policies will have a $0 to $10 per month increase. 7% will see a $10 to $20 monthly increase. 4% will see a greater than a $20 monthly increase. 23% will have an $86 per month decrease. And mind you, those are national averages, and we're here in Louisiana.
So there's this community rating system, CRS, as outlined by FEMA. Can we talk a little bit about what the CRS is and how it is applicable to flood insurance rates?
Right, and what's interesting is this is what's got us into this podcast that we're doing today. And so I'm not a civil engineer or surveyor, but I've researched this, and from FEMA's website, what they do is they credit each community for flood mitigation efforts that they undertake. And it's a 1 to 10 scale where it basically, a 10 is a 0 credit, and a 1 is a 45% credit. So as you go up that scale or go down the scale to where you get to a 1, the lower the number, the higher the discount is. And I want to mention that this is built into the rating structure. So if someone calls me to rate a flood policy, whatever community rating system discount is in effect is already built in. So it's not something we're dealing with on the back end. But currently, according to FEMA's April 2022 community system eligible communities list, the best area in Louisiana is a 5, which gives policyholders a 25% discount. And I see that Baton Rouge is a 7, which is a 15% discount. And again, that's built in. And Jonathan, as we discussed before, we know that there's huge flood mitigation projects going on, such as the Darlington Reservoir and so on. And I would expect that those would help the discount, but I think that's to be determined.
Yeah, so when there are mitigation projects that happen, those are considered in this rating system. We don't know the necessarily totality of the impact, but we do know they are taken under consideration.
Absolutely correct.
And so aside from the mitigation of efforts by local municipalities and communities, as an individual, what can I do to potentially help reduce my flood insurance costs? So,
very hard to, short of moving the home, the things are, one, elevating the house, which is expensive, but it drops a premium an average of $9,900, so just short of $10,000 a year. If you raise, a lot of us have these central air conditioning units on pads right outside the home, and if you raise those, that machinery and equipment, which is often some of the major things that are damaged in a flood, the average decrease is $700. For installing flood vents, it actually allows the flood waters to go through and, even more important, go out. The average decrease is $1,500, and of course we're not dealing with basements here in Louisiana, but perhaps in North Louisiana. But infilling a basement is an average decrease of $3,580.
And so we've talked a lot about the technical aspects of the flood insurance, what impacts the rates, even some mitigation efforts that as an individual I can do to reduce my flood insurance costs. But let's take it back a step to talk about in preparing for a flood. We have identified that living in South Louisiana, even in East Baton Rouge Parish, a great deal of us know that we are at risk for flooding. We saw that evident in August of 2016, and sometimes even on some of these pop-up showers we have that sustained for quite an amount of time, and the water does not recede fast enough. And so how can I prepare for a flood, knowing that I potentially could flood at some point? What are some steps that I can take to prepare for that day? Should it, prayerfully and hopefully it does not happen, but just to be ready.
Yes. So I did want to mention, and I alluded to this at the beginning, as how catastrophic and how sudden these events are. And you ask people, well, where did the water come in? And most of them said the water came from everywhere at one time. So it didn't just come in the front door. It didn't just came up in the back door. It came up from everywhere. So what we see is people that don't purchase flood insurance, they tend to think they can mitigate the risk. And even folks that have made complicated flood walls and flood prevention systems, more often than not, these things fail. So with that in mind, the best thing you can do is to buy flood insurance, almost universally. But the first thing is know your flood risk. You may not have a mortgage on your house, and therefore your bank is not telling you that you have to buy it. So what you can do very simply is, one, call your insurance agent. Two, you can, on FEMA's website, you can go on the FEMA.gov and see if you're in a flood zone. It pulls up a map. But the main thing is, particularly if you have insurance, is to take photos and videos of all major household items and valuables. Store important documents and valuables, wedding photos in places that are high where they cannot be flooded, because those are things that are irreplaceable. But general and long term, before flooding is imminent, elevate and anchor the utilities. Waterproof, again, a basement, we don't have many of those. Clean debris from gutters and downspouts. Elevate and move your furniture. And when flooding is imminent, you want to take care of the physical safety of your loved ones and pets, and stay alert by monitoring the news and emergency channels.
So thank you for that, because I think sometimes we don't think about the preparation for a flood until sometimes after the fact. We wish we could have prepared, because like you said, once the flooding starts, water just comes from everywhere, no specific direction, where if it came from the front, you had time to make preparations in the back of the house, even move some things. Water just really has no boundaries and will come from all directions. And so preparing every day or at certain points throughout the year when it's not flooding is key to make sure that you find yourself in a good position should you flood. Now, after the flood, God forbid that you have to deal with it, what are some steps that one should take after they've had to deal with flooding of a property to begin the next steps to repair and rebuild?
Yeah, and I want to say at the outset, I'm going to attack this from the angle of having flood insurance. One of the things that people that have not had a claim before, whether it's a roof claim or a flood claim or any type, is they don't realize that they have to prove their loss. So as the property owner, you have to take steps to prove what was damaged and how much. And many people are under the mistaken impression that the adjuster is going to tell them how much damage they have, and it's often overlooked and people are surprised. So when it's safe to return home, first thing you want to do is videotape everything. Is take 10 minutes per room or more just to detail, look in closets, under beds, everything that's damaged, but really before you start doing anything else. So back to proving your loss, you want to get make, model, serial number of large household appliances and so on. Collect samples of, one of the things you'll do is they call it mucking the house out as soon as possible. You want to take the carpet out. A lot of people will go ahead and remove the drywall where it's damaged. But before you do that, you certainly want to document everything, even piles of debris. You want to go ahead and videotape that, because you'll forget some things. So the more you do, the better. You want to have samples of carpet, wallpaper, many of those things. What I've heard it said many people did, the adjusters want you to leave a 12 by 12 square in place of each. So the carpet, you take it all out, but you maybe leave one nailed down piece that's a 12-inch by 12-inch square. And really, even before you start doing some of that, and I have it in reverse order here, but you want to make sure before you turn on the electricity and air conditioning that it's safe, that you have someone that knows what they're doing look at that and make sure that when you flip that switch, you don't have some explosion or something like that. So, and then after you collect this video evidence or photographic or however, you want to immediately throw out any wet items that could pose a health risk, and also cause the house to grow mold and things like that.
So thank you for that insight on and those tips on how do we prepare, and then what we should do should we flood. And so for our listening audience and those who are potentially thinking about buying property and understanding that they are at the risk of flooding, what advice would you give to them as they prepare to navigate that process?
So whether or not something floods on a regular basis or has it flooded, that's something you'd really want to know in determining the value of a property to purchase. So one of the first things you should do is get an NFIP flood insurance quote and a private insurance flood insurance quote. If the quotes are really bad, you really want to reconsider your either buying the property at all or the price that you're paying for it.
And so in getting that insurance, how do I determine the amount that I would need? Who should make that determination?
Well, ultimately, of course, the bank will. The only thing they're interested in protecting is the amount their loan is. So you have a homeowner that's close to paying their house off, and you only owe $50,000. Well, the lender is only going to make you buy $50,000 when perhaps your interest in that property is much greater. And I recommend the maximum amount, $250,000 on a home, and the maximum amount of contents, $100,000.
And so, as one who would be purchasing flood insurance, you need to make that determination and not let it be left up to your lender or your bank.
Correct. And just to follow up on that, Jonathan, have seen people that bought an owner finance property, and that owner, as it were, the lender, did not force them to buy flood insurance. Thus, they never realized they were in a flood zone. And again, this goes back to the initial statement of you need to know if you're in a flood zone or not.
And so, Al, thank you for being here with us today. You've given us a wealth of information as it relates to being prepared for flood, what to do afterwards, how one can go about obtaining flood insurance, understanding even to some degree how the rates are determined. And living here in, as we've said before, South Louisiana, we know we are at risk of flooding potentially at any point. And so it would be wise for us to consider ensuring that we protect our investments, our property, and all of the contents within it with some type of flood insurance. And so to our listening audience, any final or closing comments you want to share from your years of expertise in being an insurance agent that you think that they would need to know?
Yeah, just pretty much all of the above. I think your home is your biggest investment. More important than that, you need to be able, if you need to leave the home or the property and let flood insurance take care of the financial situation and not put yourself in a dangerous situation by being in a place of floodwaters.
Well, you heard it here on Stormwater Talk. Al, thank you for joining us for this episode of Stormwater Talk. And to our listening audience, tune in for our next episode.
Thank you for having me.
To find out more about the Stormwater Master Plan, you can visit stormwater.brla.gov. You can also follow on social media at StormwaterEBR.